What's up, everybody? We're back again, this time with a different change of pace. We're not going to be really working on cars, but we're still going to be building things. So you can see behind me, obviously, we've got a lot of PC parts. So today we're going to be focusing on building a brand new PC from the ground up. I'm hoping to direct this video to more like newcomers, people who want to get into the PC space but are a little scared of building a PC. I'll preface this by saying you can build a PC 100 different ways in 100 different matters of order. There's going to be people who comment, you're doing this wrong, I do it this way. The end result's the same. If it boots and it posts and it runs, you did a good job. That's it. So just leave it at that. But the point of the video that I'm trying to make here is to show you that it's really not that bad. I know the parts are expensive. It gets scary sometimes. You think, oh man, what if I snap something? There goes $1,000 down the drain, especially with the crazy prices of GPUs nowadays. But I want to show you that it really isn't that bad. If you can get a memory stick, if you remember the PS1, PS2 era, when you used to have to blow on memory sticks, or even the Nintendo 64s, or even what do you call them? I'm thinking of the GameCube, I'm thinking of the Game Boy. You can build a PC. It's plug and play to a certain degree. There are a few things and a few nuances that you need to be mindful of, but we're going to point it out in this video. This PC in particular behind me is a AMD build, so it's going to be an AMD Radeon RX 7900 XTX with the Gigabyte board. Personally, I've only built really MSI boards, not saying anything wrong with Gigabyte boards, but I actually got a great deal on the Gigabyte board, the AMD Ryzen 7800 X, X3D. I always get the letters mixed up. And it also came with 32 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. So I'm not too pressed. I actually have better sticks in a different box if it needs it. Since this is going to be for my brother, if he ends up needing more RAM, I can always rip it out of there. I've got 64 gigs in that one, but this should be more than enough for what he wants to do. So it's going to be an AMD build. I personally have an Intel build in mind with the 4090. Just, you know, I'm not trying to flex, but that's my build. I've always been an Intel fanboy, but recently, as I've been building more and more AMD systems, I'm starting to lean more towards AMD, because Intel kind of just pushes a ton of power in their units to get the performance, which results in a ton of heat. AMD does it a lot more efficiently. So I'd say if you're looking for a pretty good gaming build, this is pretty much where to go. This isn't really what I would call an entry-level build. This is pretty expensive. I mean, the graphics card alone here is just shy of $1,000 at $959 with tax. That's going to bring you up to $1,000. Anyway, I've got my coffee prepped. We got the espresso here. Forgive me if I make mistakes or if I sound a little incoherent. I've been going on a crazy schedule lately where I've been hitting the gym super late at night. Last night I actually just didn't sleep. I got up, I stayed up till 5:30, 6 in the morning, had breakfast, and then I slept through the day. So I'm kind of on a night shift routine, which is new to me. I'm just on a schedule for the month currently, so it's a bit of a change. Excuse the mess in the shop as well. I don't usually build PCs in here, but because I couldn't get the GoPro to behave with my computer and do a live stream inside, we're in here because the lighting is great. So hopefully you guys are able to see everything in pretty much clear HD quality. And again, if anywhere in this process you have questions, please feel free to drop a comment down below. So without further ado, I'm not going to bore you guys with unboxing. I don't really like videos where people film themselves unboxing things for 35 minutes. If that's your thing, go for it. It's not for me. So I'm going to start with just unboxing everything that I need to get prepped up, and then we're just going to skip right to that. All right, so here's our case. It's unboxed. This is the Fractal Meshify C. Personally, I like Fractal cases. I've built quite a few PCs now using their cases. I just like the way they look. I like the way they're designed and stuff. So that's just it. I like them, right? I'm not sponsored by Fractal in any shape, way, or form. If they want to hit me up and sponsor me, that'd be cool, but that's not going to happen more than likely. So we like this case. All right, so one thing I will say that I'm not really a fan of is this magnet pad, which effectively is the mesh that filters through the top. But I guess the top is usually an exit vent anyway in most builds. I don't know of many builds that use this as an intake vent. We'll get into the fan dynamics later, but I guess that does make it easy to clean. Usually Fractal puts a thing in the front somewhere for a mesh. I don't know how this front one is mounted. It looks like it might just be a pull one to access the filter. Let's see if it has a bottom mesh. It does have a bottom mesh that's pullable, or at least it's removable from the front. These are just dust filters, really, really useful to have to limit the amount of dust that gets inside the machine. Now, we've got a glass panel on this side, and we've got a metal panel on the back. Now, most builds are always going to have a metal panel on the back, and you will either have a glass panel on the front or a metal panel, depending on the selection of your case. Now, when it comes to case selection, I would just encourage that you pick whatever case you like. That should be your first criteria, and the second criteria should be, does it have good reviews in terms of cooling? So cooling is very important, especially if you're going to run, you know, high intensity games or rendering or whatever the case is. You know your use case best. So use those two criteria. Maybe put the second criteria first. Make sure cooling is a priority. This is pretty good reviews in terms of cooling, and for what it's going to be used for, there's no real intensive cooling needed here. So it should be fine. Now, every case will come with one of these, a user guide. Make sure you use this. These are very useful. I know even if you've built a PC 1,000 times, I've built quite a few in my lifetime. These are still very useful because they show you, right, dust maintenance. So yeah, like I was saying, the front does unclip, so you can pull that mesh off. I just haven't done that yet. It'll even show you how to set up your water cooling, you know, radiator options, fan options, mounting disk drives, mounting hard drives, optical drives, you know, your I/O, how to put in the graphic card and such. So very useful to have and read through this in its entirety. So if it's your first time building something, make sure you read through this. It will tell you everything you need. That being said, we're going to put this to the side right now and we're going to start disassembling. So the first thing I want to do is actually remove this glass panel and put it in a safe location. So it looks like we have 4 of these, I don't know what you want to call these, screws that we'll set to the side here. And with these glass panels, I don't know if you've seen PC Master Race on Reddit. People put these on porcelain tiles all the time and they break the glass. Do not set this on porcelain or put it on hard surfaces, and set it aside somewhere where it'll be safe. In my case, I'm gonna get this thing completely out of my way because I don't wanna accidentally end up breaking it. So naturally, where I'll do that is put it in the wagon on a nice soft carpet. As long as nobody steps on it, it shouldn't break. So, watch it just explode randomly. Okay, so that gives us access to the inside of the case, which is really where we're gonna be working a lot. And what I also wanna do is flip our case around and go ahead and remove this back panel. And that's primarily because when we're routing our cables and routing, oh my goodness, this is tight. I think I'll get a Phillips head. Routing our cables and doing all kinds of other things during installation, we're gonna want this back panel off. Now, for some reason, I've noticed this with Fractal, they really do tighten these down sometimes like crazy. So these are usually gripped so you can loosen them or tighten them by hand, which is all you need. We'll get into how you should torque things down so you don't end up breaking anything here in a bit. But sometimes when they're shipped out, they're really tight, so it's usually a Phillips head or even a flat will do to get these off. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that and then we'll remove this panel. All right, here's my Phillips. We're gonna go ahead and just go ahead and loosen it with the Phillips first, and then we can do it by hand. All right, these stay with the panel. Looks like these guys stay with the panel. Okay. Come on now. So it's pull out. And this is gonna vary case by case. Again, why you should read the instructions for your case. Now, another reason why I pulled that off is because usually inside the case is a box like this. If it's not in the shipping box, it's usually in the case box. We are gonna need this because this is gonna have our accessories, our hard drive screws, and everything we pretty much need, including the motherboard standoffs, whatever you need. So very important that you locate this box because your hardware is gonna be in here. So we're just gonna open that temporarily. And usually they include zip ties. Did they include in this one? They did, perfect. So we're just gonna open this up. Oh wow, they even added a little microfiber dust towel. Now I didn't mention this yet, but I like to wear gloves for 2 reasons. When we get to the processor and mounting it, I know there are situations where static can kill those. I personally have never experienced it. I've handled it, you know, barehanded before. I don't recommend you do that. I don't recommend you should work on a carpety surface somewhere where you have a lot of static. Sometimes you can kill or damage sensitive electronics that way. So wearing gloves is a good prevention method. And besides, I have sweaty hands personally, and if I end up touching all these metals and stuff, I'll leave my fingerprints. Not that I'm committing a crime here, but I'll leave, you know, oily fingerprints or oily marks all over the case, and then it's just ugly, right? We're trying to keep this as clean as possible. So throw on some gloves. It doesn't matter. Medical gloves, mechanics gloves, whatever you want. Usually the disposable ones work great for me because I just rip them and tear them off. So anyway, with that out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and start planning to install our mother. All right, so I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I didn't realize I didn't press the record button, but I basically pulled this front I/O cover and panel off, and this is gonna be completely dependent on your case. So whatever I'm doing here may not apply to you, but usually in most cases you can pull this off. They have these plastic tabs that love to break with age, but yanking back gently will usually pop it out. But again, do not do that without consulting the manual of your case. The reason I did that is to pull off this front dust filter. I wanted to get that off because I'm actually going to remove the front Fractal fan here and the rear fan. That's because I'm going to be replacing them with Arctic fans. I'm not a big fan of the fans using this machine. I like Fractal fans aren't bad, but they don't really have or push as much air as I'd like them to, and they don't really hit the RPM requirements that I'd really like to see out of them. So we're going to be pulling out this 120 millimeter and what looks to be a 140 millimeter fan out of here, and then we'll replace those with Arctic fans later. Besides, once we pull the fans out, again, this is optional. You don't have to completely do this. Some cases already have all the fans you need. This case definitely doesn't. It's more like a demo. You get one fan in the front, one fan in the back. Definitely not enough to run most rigs. In my opinion, you really should be running more fans on the top, bottom, and so on. But this also depends on your case. The fans might all be pre-installed, in which case you would go straight into the motherboard part of this. But because, again, we're doing a fan upgrade and there's just simply not enough fans here, I'm going to go ahead and remove these two, and it'll actually give us some space too to work and go ahead and install things. So let's go ahead and do that. Usually these fans on almost all cases are held in with Phillips heads. So we're just going to pop this back in real quick. So again, it should just clip in. There we go. And so you guys can see a little bit better. You can see we have Phillips heads holding these, and what I like to do is loosen each one first because they tend to be a little tight in the beginning, and then I will go ahead and remove them one by one all the way. Now these screws, you'll notice, are pretty coarse thread. That's because the fans, and pretty much all fans I've ever seen, they don't actually have threads cut into them. So I will get to this part when we start installing the new fans, but you're actually going to be cutting in threads into the fans. So you'll be cutting into the plastic the first time you put these screws in, and that can feel kind of weird, and you might think you're breaking something, but I can reassure you, you are not. However, it is important to put them in straight. Now, let's get this fan out of here. Now, I wouldn't recommend you let your fans dangle by the wires ever like I'm doing here, but because I'm not really going to be using these fans ever, I don't mind. So I'm just going to funnel these wires out of here, and we're going to go ahead and let that fan drop, and then we're going to go ahead and flip the case again. And honestly, I'm getting kind of annoyed with these dust filters constantly getting in my way, so we're just going to set that aside. Now, same thing here again. We're just going to unscrew one by one. And I know what you're thinking, we got power tools all around us right now, why don't we use them? I'm not a big fan of power tools, especially when it comes to installing parts on a PC. A lot of these screws don't have a lot of threads. A lot of them don't get torqued very tight at all. And if you use power tools, you are 100% going to break or snap something. So enjoy the process is what I like to say. Do everything by hand and slow down, have a coffee, have a tea, have a snack, and get intimate with your build. I mean, that's how I see it, right? Maybe don't make love to it, but you know, I won't judge you if you do. Alrighty, there's our Fractal fans out for the count. We'll just put them right here. Maybe one day I'll build something with all the Fractal fans I have sitting in my closet, but probably not. So now we can get to our, I'm gonna just remove that dust filter, get to installing our motherboard. All right, so we got our case laid down. The next step here is going to be installing our standoff screws for our motherboard. Now, if you think about it, the motherboard really shouldn't be laying on the metal of the case itself. It needs to stand off on something that effectively floats, okay? So usually standoff screws are not installed, at least from what I've seen on most cases. In this case, we have 8, and it comes with this little tool. And basically what this tool does, it has a Phillips head. Let me get it out of here so you guys can see this. I'll put them all here. Come on now. It's got a hex on one side and a Phillips head on one side, and the reason for that is so that, why are these guys screwed together? When you're installing them, the hex bit goes over it, and then you can tighten it down with the Phillips head to torque them down. These need to be fairly tight, you know, it's basically what we do, or at least what I would recommend when you're tightening anything on here, including the motherboard or the standoff screws, is tighten it until you feel the resistance once it's tight, and then usually just a little bit of a turn. I like to use the tips of my fingers on the screwdriver. I don't use my hand because I'm strong in my hand, right? But I'm not very strong with my fingers like this. And then just torque it maybe like 1/8 of a turn or so. Basically tighten a little bit more. That's all you need to do. Don't go crazy with this. If you've ever worked on German cars, try to think of this as like transmission pan screws or intake manifolds, like the very small bolts, or like on the thermostat housings and stuff. Those little aluminum bolts, if you torque them too much, you're gonna break them. So if you work on German cars, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So if you don't, just imagine it very fragile. I don't know. That's the best way I could describe it. So what we need to do is we have 8 standoff screws. Follow the manual on where you need to install them. So for us, we've got them in this top corner, and with these screws, be very careful not to start them crooked. So you don't want to cross thread. You really don't want to cross thread anything, period. And this is going to be pretty hard to do in gloves, I ain't gonna lie. So I might actually take my gloves off for this part, because I don't have the feeling. See, this is what happens when I don't work on my cars for like a month. I lose the touch, and it appears I have lost the touch. I can't get any of these started, man. I have lost my touch. Okay, so in an attempt to redeem myself from fumbling earlier, it helps when you read the instructions. This tool actually helps, obviously, with installation. So the easiest way to do it now is just to use the tool, line it up, and torque it down. Then take it off. As you can see, go ahead and load the next one in. Put it in the hole, line it up, and go ahead and torque it down. So this is why reading instructions is important. To be fair, in my defense, this is actually the first time I'm seeing a standoff tool. My MSI did not have this. Or excuse me, not the MSI. The last Fractal case, because it would come with the case, didn't have this. All right, so we got our standoff screws here. We've got 3 right here, 1 right here. This looks like the guide pin. We've got another one here and 3 down here. So all of them are installed. So now we're ready to go ahead and start planning to put our motherboard in. So let's go ahead and open up our motherboard. Spoiler alert, I've already opened it, but I haven't unpackaged it. So we're gonna grab it. Usually I like to grab it by the back IO here, the meat of the board. Don't grab it, you know, anywhere where there's plastic or these little RAM clips and stuff, which we'll see here in a second. I like to grab it here, right? So this cooler here area with the IO, it's safe to grab. Everywhere else, be a little more cautious. So we're gonna go ahead and unpack this. Usually there's tape on the back, and I always hold it and yank the plastic away. So let's take a look at our board, make sure it is actually new, which it looks like it is. So what a pretty board. This is actually a pretty nice board. All right, so this is called the back IO here, and this back IO will fit into this little square slot. You'll notice, or rather rectangle. This rectangle fits in that rectangle in simple man terms. So the easiest way to install this is usually I put one hand right here, kind of grab it and feed it in slowly. And what you want to do is you're going to be lining up that back IO and then guiding that in. And then as you guide that in, you should notice that your standoff screws, so you'll notice this pin has lined up, but your standoff screws, the little brass parts, will line up in all of the holes. So let me see if I can actually get a light in here for you guys. See the brass, 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 brass. That's a guide pin, brass, 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 brass. They should all line up, and you can see the back IO is lined up as well. So now that that's in, we're gonna go ahead and get our motherboard screws out and then start torquing our motherboard down. Okay, so to identify your motherboard screws, usually you're gonna get different types of screws that come with your case, right? Now, it's a little tricky. Usually you have 2 like round shaped head screws. These are more for other things in the case that you can kind of see right here. Usually what they do, most case manufacturers will provide just enough screws, maybe +1, for your motherboard. So if you're confused which screw it is, it should be the smooth round heads. Now I'll try to get this on camera for you. Let me get one, hopefully not drop all of these. There we go. It should look like this, very smooth, no ridges on the edges, just rounded all the way across. And like I said, there should just be enough for your motherboard on the number of standoff screws effectively. So to install these guys, we're gonna go ahead and get our Phillips head. And now with these, I like to hold a finger and slowly pull it in. And you can start anywhere you want. And again, do not cross thread these, just run them in lightly. And what I like to do actually is not tighten any of them yet, because I have had cases and motherboards where one of your standoff screws might be a line or 2 of them, and you go ahead and torque it down, and then the others aren't lined up, and now you can't shift your board. And then you're stuck in a position where you got to loosen the one you tighten so that you can shift your board and get it all lined up where you need to. Now, what's the worst thing that can happen at this step? Well, things I've seen before are people drop their screwdriver. If you drop the screw, usually they're not heavy enough to damage the board, though that's not ideal because it can damage a trace or something, in which case, you know, you might turn your board into a paperweight. But again, the worst thing I've ever seen is people slip, their hand slips, it happens, and then they drop the screwdriver, and a screwdriver is pretty heavy, right? So that's heavy enough to do a little bit of damage to the board. So this process, again, just take it nice and slow. Like I said, get nice and intimate with your board. And again, don't cross-thread these screws. If you are going to put, if you're just, you know, if it's your first time tightening things and you go to tighten a screw and you notice there's a lot of resistance from the get-go, you're more than likely putting it in at a wrong angle and it's cross-threading. An easy way to fix that is actually to turn it, what is this, anti-clockwise, to loosen it. And listen, you hear it skipping, right? Because we're basically loosening it, it comes up and it jumps. And then you can do that and kind of go back and forth until you feel it line up correctly. Now again, look how little force I'm using here to tighten this screw. You do not need, if you're having, again, if there's a lot of force, initial force, you're cross-threading that screw. So make sure you don't do that. Make sure you stop and don't cross-thread things. This is just in general a good piece of advice. So we're going to go ahead and finish the rest of these screws. And there should be one more. So it looks like Fractal did not give me a +1 screw. So there's exactly the number of screws we need. Okay, now you noticed I've tightened all of them very loosely. Now for the amount of torque that I like to put on these screws, right? You see how that's basically resistance? What I like to do is use my fingers and I'm just gonna turn it. That was about 1/8 of a turn, and I'm gonna work my way around. Do the same thing. Again, you don't have to, you know, Hulk smash these screws, but you do want them to be fairly tight because they can, well, I want to say this, I don't want to say they work themselves loose, but I have seen them be loose, and it could just be because whoever installed them didn't tighten them initially the first time. But these don't really vibrate like an engine, right? So they don't really loosen through vibration, but we're just going to go ahead and tighten each one just about 1/8 of a turn, use our fingers. And there we go. And then I'm going to run through them one more time to double check. And then we'll go ahead and move on to the next step. All right, after double checking all of my motherboard screws, I'm going to go ahead and start taking steps that I guarantee is going to inflame the comment section. Why did you start doing this? Why don't you put in your RAM first? Why don't you put that in first? I'm going to tell you right now, the order doesn't matter. Do it in whatever order makes sense to you and whatever order is the most convenient when installing things, right? I wouldn't install the cooler right now because it would get in the way of other things. I usually do that last. Besides, we don't even have a CPU in there, so the cooler wouldn't make sense. So bear with me. What I'm going to do is actually install my M2 SSD. Now, this is kind of where things might change for you. I recommend getting an NVMe, honestly, because they're pretty cheap and they're about the same price as SSDs now. These guys are so much faster than SSDs. Plus, I like the convenience of them because they're literally like a memory chip now. If that is all foreign language to you, basically let me explain. So these guys essentially plug directly into the board if it's compatible. Most newer boards now are, and there's no cables to be run. You just plug it in. Usually there's a heat sink and stuff for it, and you're done. That's it. If you're running a conventional hard drive or SSD, you'll use something called a SATA cable, which if it was provided somewhere with the motherboard, which it usually is, I'll show you what that looks like later. And you'll usually plug that into the SATA ports on the board that are located normally here, but they can be located in other locations depending on the board brand that you do have. Those hard drives usually get mounted in the bottom or on the back, or if you have an SSD, you can mount it however you want because there's not a physical disk rotating inside in there, so you can kind of zip tie it to the back. I've seen every other configuration in the world for those. But again, if you can get yourself an M2 NVMe SSD, I would highly recommend it. They're just easy to install, they're faster, they're just better in every which way, shape, and form. So to install this guy, usually on your board, it says somewhere along there M.2 SSD, which in this case is here on the board. Now, this uses a smaller Phillips. We're just going to unscrew this back Phillips, and we're going to go ahead and get that out. And these are pretty much spring loaded, so you'll notice it will pop up, and then we'll slide this out. And then does the screw actually fall out? No, it doesn't. Now, this little plate right here is called a heat sink. Honestly, I've seen even the WD Black, the one I have right here. This is the SN850X. I actually really like this one. I would recommend it personally. They actually sell this model with a heatsink. Now, most boards come with a heatsink like this. So it doesn't really make sense to get, and I don't even know if it would fit actually, to get your M2 with a heatsink, because then you have a heatsink on top of a heatsink. It just doesn't make sense to me. And honestly, I've never seen one of these get hot enough to really warrant using a heatsink. Now, some boards don't necessarily have a built-in heatsink like this, and the NVMe might just sit out in the open. I could see why you might want a heatsink then. But if you're getting one, you know, with a board like this that has a heatsink, don't bother spending the extra money for a NVMe that comes with a heatsink. Just get the regular one and save yourself some cash. That being said, a common mistake that people make is they take this off, but they don't take the plastic liner off. You need to take this liner off to reveal what's called a thermal pad. If you touch the thermal pad with your hands, you'll notice it feels like it's a little, let me put this here. It feels like it's a little greasy or oily to touch. That's normal. As they age, they actually will ooze and such. And you can replace these pads, they're fairly cheap. They literally just stick on. These thermal pads help facilitate thermal transfer from the NVMe or whatever the device is into the heat sink, which is just basically a metal block. As we all know, metal is very conductive, so it makes for good heat transfer. So let's go ahead and get our little guy out here. And we're just going to plug it in. And keep in mind there's a notch here, so the orientation does matter. It can't get installed like this, it can only go one way. So look on your board. Let me get a light in here. And you'll notice that the pins over here, there's only 4 pins and the rest of the pins are there, which means it goes in one way and one way only. So be very careful, don't force things. Generally, the name of the game with PC building is if it ain't going, you're probably doing something wrong. Now, what I did there is I have this hand just kind of supporting it. I take my back finger and I'm gonna push it in, and there's kind of like a positive feedback. You'll feel it like slot in. And it's normal for it to actually be sprung up like this. You might be like, oh, it's bending. No, it's actually normal for NVMEs to kind of just sit like this. Because what will happen is we can actually push it down. And you know you've done it right if it gets into the little groove here where the screw is supposed to go. If it doesn't line up, usually you need to line it up better, or maybe it needs to seat in better. So originally when I recorded this, I actually put in my M2. The first thing I did was put the M2 in. But keen eyes, because I don't want to confuse people, what I did is I put it in, but I didn't put the locking screw for the M2. So I put the cover on. And I mean, it's not the end of the world, but what you can do if you don't do that is potentially seat it crooked or something and then have issues. So again, you can put the M2 in. I prefer to put it in the first thing right away, just because it's easier. You don't have all these cables and stuff in the way. It's just so easy to install these. You can either do it earlier or later, but you definitely can't do it if your GPU is in the way. So it needs to be installed before the GPU. In your motherboard, usually you should get something like this. These are M2 locking screws. So we're gonna go ahead and take that out and then put that in real quick. Okay, there we go. That's fixed now, so we don't need to worry about that. Okie dokie. So you can see here, it actually sits in there pretty well. So we're good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and take our heatsink, and it has a little lip, a little tongue right there. We want to make sure to insert that, and we're just gonna gently put this down. And then I'm gonna take my Phillips and I'm gonna guide it into the hole. And I'm gonna go ahead and torque this down, provided that I'm in the hole, which I'm not. Again, I'm not in the hole. And this one, again, we're just gonna tighten it with 2 fingers. No crazy torques here. And you should be good to go. It shouldn't really wiggle. The screw shouldn't be loose. And we've got our M2 SSD installed. So why did I install that before anything else? Well, when there's a cooler, when there's memory, there's a GPU. You know, with a GPU in place, you'll see it's gonna be impossible to actually get to that. That's why I like to install the M2 first while there's nothing on the board yet. It's just easier in my opinion. So again, there's a million schools of thought here. I ain't gonna answer to all of them. Just simply say my point. Now, boards also might have other M2 ports like this one. Oftentimes they are pre-loosened. So I like to just double check the screws. Sometimes they're not loose, sometimes they are, and make sure they're not loose. I'm not installing another M2 here, so I'm not gonna bother taking that plate off. If you were installing another M2, check your board's instructions. Sometimes they'll have multiple lanes of this, or they'll have like a block like this where you can install it somewhere underneath. So again, the manual is your best friend. Now, what is the next thing I'm gonna go ahead and install here? I'm gonna go ahead and actually install the CPU. So we're gonna go ahead and unbox that, bring it over here, and then I'll show you how to install that. Now, I think this is the part that everybody's scared of the most. So we'll go ahead and explain how to do it very detailed and very slow. And I'll show you that it's really not as scary as it needs to be. Once you get that out of the way, that's one of the big purchase items. The rest of this goes really smooth. Okay, so we're at CPU time. Now, this is the AMD Ryzen 7 7800X3D. Like I mentioned before, a very popular CPU for gamers. It honestly does a really good job. It's very efficient. But we're gonna walk through a couple things about this unit. So what is a CPU in simple terms? This is the brain of the PC. All the different processes come together. This is the one that's really responsible for bringing it all together. I'm not going to get into the details. That could be a video in itself. I'm just going to keep this at a very high level. Again, we're just focusing on building the PC here, not getting into the intricacy. However, what I do want to mention between AMD and Intel, the differences, this metal block up here where the IHS is, think of this as like your cooling block. This is where all the thermal energy is going to go into. And that's actually what the cooler is going to sit on with the thermal paste and pull that heat out of the CPU. Now, why am I mentioning AMD and Intel here? AMD, if you notice, is a lot more square. I don't have an Intel chip in front of me. The new Intel chips, like the 13900K and so on, tend to be a lot longer. And the problem with Intel actually is because it's a bit more long instead of square like this, when you go ahead and mount coolers, sometimes the coolers have poor pressure, and the worse pressure that they have and worse contact that they have, the worse the thermal transfer is going to be. So oftentimes, and even on my own build, you can get a completely new mounting system here. So you'll notice there's like a spring system here, these 4 screws. You can actually remove that and buy one from like Thermaltake or stuff, and it's an aluminum block, which effectively clamps the Intel chip all the way down evenly and gets rid of that bowing effect that tends to happen with that CPU. As far as I'm concerned, AMD doesn't really have that issue. So if you're running an AMD, you can run the stock clamp just fine without any problems. Honestly, you can run Intel with the stock clamp, but if you notice that you're having bad thermal transfer between any of your separate cores, or you're just having bad thermal transfer in general, you might have to get that block plate so that you can clamp it down evenly. I would recommend it regardless if you're running Intel. They're pretty cheap, and you'll probably notice better thermals even if you have a good clamping force with the stock clamp. That being said, if you're running AMD, you don't have to do much here. All you really need to do is most of the AMD boards come with these 2 plastic like placeholders. You can actually remove those because our cooler is going to have its own brackets to take in the place of where these guys are right now. So we're just going to go ahead and loosen. And when I'm loosening these screws, I'm going to get to the point where I almost loosen them all the way. And I'm going to pinch it with my fingers. That way I don't drop the screw on the board itself. So again, we'll go ahead and loosen. Once it gets close, I get my fingers in place. And if this guy smacks around on your board, don't worry about it. It's plastic. So plastic, fantastic. Won't damage anything. Again, we're avoiding metal, really. We don't want metal touching our board. That does not equal good things. So depending on your cooler, you'll have different bracket mount tree. I really like the Peerless Assassin. I'll probably save the commentary for when we get that installed. But it's a very cheap cooler that does a really good job. I'll link a review from Gamers Nexus below. They're a really good channel. I highly recommend them if you want to get into like thermals, and if you really like the PC side of things, they go into great detail on that channel. Anyway, now the next step is we're going to go ahead and remove this plastic cover, which you should be able to just pry right up. There we go. Come on. All right, buddy. This one's really in there, isn't it? There we go. So this plastic cover is useless. You don't actually need it. It's just a guard. Now, this is very important. What we're looking at right here are the pins on the motherboard. Now, old CPUs, if you're like me, the pins used to be on the CPU and not on the motherboard themselves. So what am I talking about pins here? Let me see if I can bring you in closer. I'll try to show you. Right there are very tiny, not hair-like, but pins that are effectively going to make contact with the bottom of the CPU. So you can see the CPU actually doesn't have any pins on it. It has these pads. Again, if you used to build PCs back in the day, your pins would have been on the CPU itself and the pad would have been on the motherboard. Now, if you buy a motherboard, I highly recommend it, if it's been a reman or it's been a return or whatever the case is, that you take a look at the pins. If they look like this is a brand new board, you're good to go. If you notice that they are grazed across or they're bent or something, you need to return it. I wouldn't bother trying to repair it if you have a return policy. If you don't and you bend them yourself, you can oftentimes use a pen or something. But honestly, best case is to avoid bending these altogether. Do not touch them with your hand. Do not touch them with a screwdriver. Don't touch them with anything, period. Just leave the pins alone. So don't be scared though. I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm just trying to warn you of the things. Now let's go ahead and get ready and install our CPU. So to do that, here we have the spring clamp. And notice the spring arm is currently held in right here. So we're gonna push down with the finger and go to our right. So I'm gonna push down, go to my right, and that's gonna lift the clamp up. I'm gonna go ahead and put this clamp up like this. It'll lock in place. And then we're just gonna go ahead and pull this cover up like that. And there's our lovely pins. Now, if you've seen the memes of people putting thermal paste in the pins, please don't do that. This is not where the thermal paste goes. Okay, do not put anything in there. Just leave it. So let's go ahead and unpack our CPU. I'm gonna put the GoPro back on my head so I don't smash these pins on accident sitting here pointing at things. And I'll show you how to get it in there. I'm gonna open our CPU. I like to open it back like this. And I'd recommend wearing gloves at this point. And we're gonna grab it. Try to avoid touching these pads. There's really no reason you should be touching them. Now, the CPU itself, you'll notice, has these two little notches. One here. Intel does the same thing. And you usually have a mark on one of the corners. You'll notice that little golden mark. That always points up. And AMD is so nice that they even put a, like, what do you call this? I can't think off the top of my head. A little divot inside the metal portion here, which also tells you where it should go. So it's really hard to mess this up. The logo should read normally, right? So top down. And basically to install this, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take our fingers and we're just gonna place it in here. Nice and gently. There we go. You heard how it sat in there. Now I want you to take a really, really close look here and make sure your CPU is seated. You notice how it's not rising up on any sides. If I take it and I just take my hands gently and move it left to right, it doesn't go anywhere. It's in this two little slots, both the top and bottom. That's what you want. This thing is now mounted in all the way. Now comes the fun part that tends to freak a lot of new builders out, is putting the clamp back down. It makes a lot of crunchy sounds. It sounds like you're breaking things. I promise you're not. That's completely normal. It can be nerve-wracking, but trust me, you're not going to break anything, provided that you've put this in exactly how it needs to be. So it just slots in, right? That's it. That's all you got to do. So let's go ahead and put our spring clamp down. So to put our spring clamp down, we're going to take our hands and we're just going to gently put this over the top. Make sure that it sits on the two pressure points right there. And we're going to take this spring, and that's going to push on this little lip right here. Now I'm going to be quiet and I want you to listen to all the beautiful sounds this makes. Now this spring, again, we're going to push this arm down below this little catch arm right here, and then we're going to go down, so down to the right and down to the left, and then it should seat in place. So I'm going to shut up now and we're going to go ahead and install this. There we go. And surprisingly, there were no crunchy sounds. My Intel made so many crunchy sounds when I installed it. Honestly, sounded like I was breaking the board. This made no sounds, so that's nice. Sometimes it makes sounds, whatever. It's happened to me every time. This one was really quiet. Maybe it's a sign. Hopefully it's not a bad sign. All right, we've got our CPU in. So now we're gonna move on to the next step. Again, the order doesn't matter here. Do in whatever order you please. I'm gonna go ahead and install my RAM sticks, which is my memory. And then I'm going to go ahead and install the Peerless Assassin cooler. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to install my RAM, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the power supply in and start routing some of the wires. And I'll show you that power supply here in a second, because I want to plug in some of these tight to reach areas that are going to be kind of hard once I've got that big old cooler in place. So I'm going to do the RAM, then the power supply, then I'll do the cooler, then we'll do the rest. So that's the order that we're going to follow. As for the RAM, you'll notice the order matters here. So you've got these 4 slots. Most boards have 4 unless you get a specialized board with more. These slots are where your RAM is going to go in. Now, if you look on the board, or if you read the manual of the board, I want you to take a look right here where it says DDR5 A1, A2, B1, B2. You notice how the bracket says A2 and B2 first? That's very important to pay attention to. If you have 2 RAM sticks, you want to put it in slot A2 and B2 first. I know it's counterintuitive, but most boards, you put it in slot 2, not slot 1. And that's because of the way that it interacts with the RAM. So very important that you don't put in the first and the fourth or side by side next to each other. Put it in the slots that it tells you to if you have 2 sticks. If you have 4 sticks, obviously it's going to be a little different for you. Just consult your manual. When it comes to RAM, make sure that when you're buying RAM, you consult the motherboard. There's an approved RAM list on the website of each motherboard. And what that means is that they've tested this memory with this board and that it's compatible. Not all sticks are compatible with all boards. That being said, can you run RAM sticks that aren't on their website? Yes, but I would do your research and do your homework. Personally, I like the website pcpartspicker.com. It's a great site where it will tell you if there's any compatibility issues with, like, you know, the cooler or the RAM, the motherboard, like things won't work, or if there's caveats, you know, if you do decide to go this way, make sure you get this or that. So I'll link that also down in the description. But just keep in mind when you're choosing RAM, I know it gets confusing. There's CLI, there's all types of different speeds. That could be a very long video in itself. A lot of people have covered that in detail, so I'm going to take that shine from them. Besides, I don't even think I'm qualified enough to even cover all the nuances with RAM. So do your homework on the RAM. Big numbers don't also always mean better. There's things like latency and stuff that you need to take in consideration. So do your research with RAM. I know it's confusing. Ask questions. Ask me. Ask anybody out there. People are out there to help you. Micro Center is a great resource in person. If you're very confused and you don't know anything about PC building, go to Micro Center, ask them. Everybody there is very friendly, very knowledgeable, and they'll get you right. All right, so here are my G.Skill RAM sticks. Now I'm gonna go ahead and take one of them out and just show you something real quick. These come in all types of flavors from RGB to whatever you like. This specific bundle that I got didn't come with RGB, not that I really care. These are pretty nice sticks though. I really like G.Skill. Again, not sponsored. They just make good RAM sticks. Now, take a look at this RAM stick and tell me what you see. If you look at this, one side is longer than the other, okay? Another thing I forgot to mention is if you have a DDR5 board, you need DDR5 RAM. DDR4 is not compatible with DDR5, and so on. DDR4 goes to a DDR4 motherboard, DDR5 goes to a DDR5. It's pretty straightforward. Now, you'll notice one side's longer, one side's shorter. If you look on the motherboard, one side is longer, one side is shorter. So you can't really mess this up. It can only go in one way. So I've seen people force these things in. Do not force them. It does not need, if it ain't going in, it ain't going in, all right? So remember, longer side goes on longer side, shorter side goes on shorter side. Should be pretty self-explanatory. Now, to unlock these locking tabs, just push your finger down, and it will unlock those tabs. Now, what you can do is when you're putting your stick in, again, pay attention to the slot that you're supposed to be putting it into, is go ahead and slot it in. And if you're sure that the long side is where it needs to be and the short side where it needs to be, take your hands and go ahead and push down. And you'll notice as I push down, those locking tabs will snap in. So it takes a little bit of pressure, not a whole lot of Hulk pressure. So, you know, if it's not going in, check it, just double check before you do that. But as you push down, those should snap in. So again, we want it in slot A2 and slot B2. That's what the board tells us. We're gonna unlock this again. Long side up, short side down. Make sure we slot in one side, slot in the other side. I'm gonna take my fingers and push evenly on both sides. I want you to pay attention to that locking tab right there. There we go. You hear a click, click, they're in, that's it. You shouldn't be able to yank them out. Don't yank them right now. If your locks have gone in, you're done. That's it. You've installed memory. Congratulations. Super easy, right? Nothing to be scared of. All right, so here's the power supply I've chosen. I've gone with the Corsair RM850X. There are a billion power supplies out there. What I would recommend to you is not to cheap out on this part. Honestly, you can get a really good power supply for anywhere from 80 to sometimes 200 bucks if you're going for 1500 watt. It just depends on your wattage load. Don't cheap out on this. I don't know why people cheap out on this. This is kind of like the cardiovascular system of your entire system. If this goes out and fries, you could fry everything on this board. If it's not good with lightning protection, or it blows up, or if you have a gigabyte from certain models that have literally exploded in the past and caught on fire, not only could you lose your house and lose things, you'll fry everything. And remember, everything here is expensive. You know, you save 50 bucks here and you end up blowing $2,000 down the drain. So please, 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 please don't go cheap on your power supplies. I'd recommend gold and up. I wouldn't really go below that, though silver should be fine. But honestly, I stick with gold and up, and that's just the standard that it's rated to. Now, this board, how do you pick a power, or rather this power supply, how do you pick a power supply? How do I know how many watts? Again, PC Part Picker is your friend right here. What it will do is it's going to calculate the total peak watt usage of your entire system. And that's essentially going to tell you what is the peak wattage. Like if I ran this thing at 100%, how many watts would it pull? So if, let's say, I think this system is about just shy under 700 watts at full tilt, like if everything was running at 100%. So if I went with a 750 watt power supply, that would leave me with a margin of 50 watts, which personally is not something that I'd like to do. I also don't like working power supplies at 100% load because you're going to put more stress on the power supply, potentially shorten its life. And plus, power spikes are a thing. You might spike at 780 for a second, which might push this way further than it needs to. My rule of thumb is I like to be at least 150 watts above the peak load. That way, if I ever have a spike or anything happens, I have more than enough power to handle it. Plus, I'm not stressing the power supply. Now, I'm not going to bother getting into the details and say, people have been like, I've run a 750 all this time. I'll let you in on a secret. Most of these can push a lot harder than they need to be, but that doesn't mean you should be pushing them harder than they need to be. Plus, you avoid the warranty. It's just not worth it, okay? Get a power supply that is higher load than you need. Again, for me, the rule of thumb is 150 watts at least above. So again, for a 680-ish watt peak system, 850 should be more than enough. And plus, if you ever upgrade it, depending on the card and stuff that you use, you got a little bit of headroom, right? So that being said, let's get this big boy unpacked. This is what they call a modular power supply, which I really like. I used to build PCs back when modular wasn't a thing. If you're wondering what modular means, that just means that all the cords for the power supply, doing this with one hand, all the cords for the power supply are actually plug and play. And what that means is these are all the cords you need right here, but you don't necessarily need to use all of these, right? So old school power supplies that aren't modular, and here, let me show you right here. What that means, I keep saying what that means, is that all these cords would effectively hardwire to this power supply, which means you would get the power supply and it would be like a snake of wires, and it was one unit. So when you were installing it, you would use all the wires that you need to power up your board, your graphics card, and everything else. And then the extra wires you would just kind of shove into corners and stuff because you didn't need them, right? Back in the day, when I used to build them, the power supply would actually power the fans. Now the motherboards, I haven't really seen any power supplies where they power the external fans in the case. Now it's all motherboard controlled. But back in that day, in that time, you did have all those cords that you had to deal with. These are so nice because you only use the cords you need, so it makes cable management a breeze. You don't have to shove cables that you aren't using in places. You just use the cables you need, and then that way it makes your life a whole lot easier. Now, always save these cables somewhere. You never know when you might need to swap a cable, or you might upgrade the system and you might need something else. So that way you don't just throw these cables away. I mean, you paid good money for this, so make sure to keep it somewhere safe. So yeah, modular power supplies are the way to go. I don't care what anybody says. Honestly, do it if you're debating on it. I don't even know if anybody even makes non-modular power supplies anymore. So yeah, here she is in her beauty. These guys are pretty hefty weight, which is good. Nice, beautiful fan right there. So they are cooled, and they'll come with their own power cord. So make sure you use the power cord that it comes with. It's rated for that wattage and voltage. So yeah, what we're going to do now is go ahead and look through this. I'm going to walk you through what we're going to be using in terms of what cords we'll need. Obviously the motherboard being the biggest one, and I'll show you what cords correspond to here. Now I will say these are indexed in such a way that you can't put cords that don't belong here. Even if you wanted to, they just won't fit. So that's done on purpose, so you can't mix and match cords and mess that up. So don't fear, you can't mess up the cords here. Even on the motherboard, you can't plug things in where they don't belong to, because it's all indexed in a certain way so that you can't do that, and you don't have to worry about accidentally plugging something in the wrong place and blowing it up. So let me go ahead and unpack these wires, and then I'll walk you through what we're going to be using in this build. Again, yours might be slightly different depending on what you have in your system, but again, it's super easy. Trust me, don't get scared. You won't mess it up. All right, let me walk you through the cables you'll need. So the easiest cable that is always required, no matter what power supply, no matter what board, is obviously your main motherboard plug-in. So this big old connector, big old meaty connector, is something you're going to need for your board. So this guy is a must. So if you got that one, you need that one. Second thing you need, CPU. So what powers your actual CPU, which is usually located on most boards up here in this top left corner. You're going to obviously need your CPU cords. So anything marked with CPU, more than likely you're going to need it. Now sometimes you get an extra one, sometimes you don't. It just depends on the setup that you're doing, but you're going to need those. Next thing on the list, what are you going to need? To power your GPU. Your GPU is going to use PCIe power. So Usually, big boy GPUs are going to need 2 sets of these cords. Depending on the GPU, when we get to that, I'll show you, you might only need 1 set. In our case, we're going to need both sets of these cords. So we're going to take that to the side. Now, I've held this cord to the side because I wanted to show you it doesn't apply for this system. But if you have optical drives like a disk drive or a physical hard drive or even an SSD, you're going to use what is called the SATA power connection, like this. So it has like a little L. So this would plug into your power supply, and then this would run to your hard drives or optical drives. Because we're not running optical drives and we're not running any hard drives other than our M2, which again, another reason why I like them for cable management, because it plugs directly into the board. Don't need to run any cables from your power supply. We can get rid of these, not in the trash, we'll keep them. But we don't need these because we're not going to be powering anything with these cords, so we'll set them aside. So that just leaves us with, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets of cords, and I think one of these is an extra. So not very many cables to manage here, which is awesome. So let's go ahead and unravel these, and then we're going to go ahead and install our power supply, plug in everything we need, and then go ahead and start routing things and plugging in actually all the power things that we need in the motherboard. And the other thing I'm actually going to do after I finish doing that is what's called the front I/O here, input output panel. This is where you plug in your USBs, the power button and stuff. I'm actually going to go ahead and plug that into the motherboard too, because once the GPU and everything is in here, it can be very hard to kind of reach those in. So I'll show you how to do that here in a second, but we got to first start with our power supply. Okay, my camera shut off there, but basically we were plugging in our CPU cables, and I just wanted to check here. So you can see we have one with 4, which is what we expect here. So there's 1 cord. Now our second cord, you'll notice there's only, sorry, that was 8. And then we have a 4 right here that is just smaller, which is interesting because the MSI boards usually have 2 sets of 8. This one has 4 and 1 set of 8. First time seeing that. So what we'll have to do for one of our plugs here on the CPU is these can usually be split apart. And we've got these 2 little tabs right here. And I'm just gonna take my pliers and actually push them together. And there we go. And we're just gonna separate it. Now you can see we just have the 4 that we need, and then we'll probably end up just zip tying this or hiding it in the back of the case. So we've got our CPU power, we've got our motherboard power. Those are the 2 big ones. Now we need our cords for our GPU. Now these are also PCIe. So what we'll do here is we're gonna need, I think, let's see, 3 of these. So 1 set. This looks like CPU. We don't need this one, so we're just gonna get this out of the way. And I think this is our second set right here. So 1 set, 2 set, and 3 set. So 1, 2, and 3. So we've got enough for our GPU. So we'll just go ahead and plug this in. We'll put one up here. And we'll put one down here, why not? There we go. So we've got all the cords we need for this build. So with everything plugged in, we're just gonna go ahead and get our box nice and vertical here. And then we're gonna wanna feed in all of this mass of wires. So I'm gonna put this box all the way over here. So we're gonna feed in this mass of wires. And when I feed it in, I go directly left towards the back of the case. So feed it in, make sure it exits out the back. And you'll see why here in a second. And once we feed in our snake of wires, we're gonna do the good old reach around here and pull that out while pushing this in. And we're gonna slide this, preferably all the way in. Come on now. What are we stuck on? There we go. We're stuck in, wow, we're stuck on what looks to be that hard drive tray. And I'm kind of tempted to just pull the hard drive tray out because I'm not going to be using it on this build. But as you can see, we can definitely fit this in. All right, I've already got 2 screws in, but to screw our power supply, we're going to use these hex and Phillips heads. So you can see it has a hex head as well as a Phillips. These are the ones you want to use for your power supply. As you can see, I've got 2 of them in here. Again, this is not something that you really got to torque down like crazy. Just holding the power supply from like flopping around, right? So you're just gonna run it in until it's nice and tight. There we go. I'm gonna do the same thing for this bottom one. And there we go. That's as tight as we want it to be. So not, as soon as you feel resistance, a little more, and that's it. And that's it for the power supply. All right, so if you're wondering what is the front I/O, this is the front I/O I was referring to earlier. Your power button, your microphone, your headphone. This could be any variation of thing. Use a USB 3.0, 2.0, restart button. Everything is different. It depends on your case. Your front I/O usually comes with a bundle of wires that look like this. You've got a blue one. This is for your USB transfer. This one's pretty straightforward to plug in. It only goes in one place in the motherboard, nowhere else. I'll show you that in a second. And then you have the rest of this called HD audio. You have things called power LED plus and minus, and so on. All these single wires are to power the front light, to power the power button, and such. So these go to a very specific place in the motherboard, and honestly, they can be kind of finicky to install because you got really skinny single ones like this that need to be put on a single pin. But I'll show you here. It's nothing scary, nothing to be afraid of. So we're gonna go ahead and untangle this little tie right here, and then after we untangle it, we're gonna rotate our box, and then we're gonna start doing the first bit of our wire management and plugging all of this in. Now, very important that you have your motherboard manual with you handy, because usually that tells you exactly where this needs to go, and it has a diagram that you need to follow because there are plus and minus. If you flip them, usually nothing bad happens, but your power button might not work. You might not have an LED, might not have audio, you might not have USB, and so on. Actually, I take that back. You'll have USB because it is literally impossible to flip this. And the hard drive audio is also pretty much impossible to, not hard drive audio, HD audio is hard to flip. So you'll usually have this and your USB, but your power button and light might not work. Okay, if you can see that, you've got great eye vision. But right there with all those colors you're seeing, underneath that in very, very fine print, again, you can just pull out your manual and read this. It actually tells you where you're supposed to plug in all of your things. So it'll say something like HD plus minus, RES minus plus, power LED plus minus. And what that does is it essentially corresponds to your wires here. So you'll notice if I pull, let's say, power LED, if you look, we've got, come on now, we've got plus minus. So plus goes to plus, minus goes to minus on the board. So that's all located here. Now we got options. We can either route the wires through there, we can route them through here, route them through here. I might try to route them through here. It might be too steep of an angle to kind of swing them around, but I'd like to do that because then I could keep the wires nice and tight and more managed. I actually plan on getting rid of this little cover here because I'm not running any hard drives, but I will be running a fan from the bottom since I can, which reminds me I need to get rid of the hard drive trays. So I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna have to pull those out here in a second. The USB that I was talking about, that blue plug, usually it's right here in the front. You can see it's got a notch in it. I'll show you why you can't flip that or plug it in anywhere else. And then on this board, it looks like our audio port is back here. So that's where that HD audio I/O cable is going to go. So let's start working them through and plugging them up. So let's start with the easiest one, the audio for the front panel. I'm just gonna run that across. And I know for a fact we need it here, and I've got a little loophole right here on this case. And you'll notice on this, there is a blank pin. That's by design, so you can't install this and flip it. So if we look at our port or the pins right here, there's gonna be one missing pin. That's gonna correspond to the blank pin on your connector. So in this case, it's going to go in like so. And it should just go easy. You shouldn't have to fight it too much. So a little bit of pressure is okay. And there's no click here, so it just kind of goes in. There's no real positive engagement. And we're just gonna kind of tuck our wires out of the way. So there we go. We've knocked out our front panel audio. So that's been taken care of. That's in and done. Now let's go ahead and move to the rest of the front panel stuff. So I've got this beautiful jumble of wires here. And again, what I wanna do is I'm gonna feed them through this port right here, because why not? Cable management's important. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Make it neat. I know it takes a little bit longer, a little bit more effort, but please, 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 please make your cables neat. Don't be messy. Don't be messy. Nobody likes a messy build. Especially if you got a glass case where it's not like a metal case where you can't see what's going on in there. Like, come on, dude. Make it clean. So we're just gonna fit all of them in through here, and I'm gonna pull extra out because it'll be easier for me to wire it with the excess through. And then we'll leave our USB plug for now. So, according to this board, you guys aren't gonna be able to see this, but I can. Oh, this mess of wires. Power LED is gonna be this little yellow slot up here, and the plus is gonna be on the left, and the minus is gonna be on the right. So I'm gonna take my power LED, I'm gonna take the single plus, and I'm gonna go ahead and slide that into the pin. And again, there's no orientation here, it just literally slots into the pin. And then I'm gonna find my minus, which is usually connected. Come on, buddy. So now we want to install this guy right here with the big blue, that's what I like to call it. So I'm actually going to run big blue underneath all these wires, and I'm going to push it through this little rubber right there. And you'll notice the blue USB 3.0 right here, it's got a notch. So you can only install this one way. Now these can be kind of a pain, I'm not going to lie, because the way they line up with cases and stuff, they can kind of be annoying, but trust me, you can get it. So there we go. It just clicks in. Look how neat that is. There we go. Now our USB 3.0, which is these guys, is connected to our board. Now the SATA ports I was telling you guys about, or SATA where you would, if you were running a traditional SSD, not an M2, or traditional hard drives, this is where your SATA cables would go. And what that means is you need your hard drive to communicate with your board, right? It needs to be connected somehow. Right here is where your SATA cables, again, you have that L. So the power actually looks like the connector, but it's a lot bigger, right? You can't put power. These aren't power connectors. These are data transfer connectors. Most motherboards will come with a cable. Let's see, with a SATA cable. So here you go. They usually have this little metal locking tab, and if you push it in there, both on the hard SSD or hard drive, and on the motherboard, it clicks. And to release them, you got to push this tab and yank them out. So this is what a SATA cable looks like, and pretty much what you'll do is they're the same on both sides, and pretty much you'll plug one side into the motherboard, the other side into your SSD or hard drive. In this case, again, this is why I suggest using an M2. You don't have to deal with that. You don't have to deal with any cables. It's much more preferred in my opinion. So that's been taken care of. Now we need to start moving to getting our snaky snake power supply wires where they need to be. But before I do that, I want to go ahead and knock this panel out here, because I'm going to put a fan down here to add an extra fan to blow up. Alright, so what you saw me do there was just pop that front panel off, pretty much get rid of that cover. That was right there because I'm going to run a fan right here. And again, because I'm not running traditional hard drives in this specific build, I don't need that tray. I am going to save it though, just in case we ever do run any in this build. Again, don't ever throw away these parts. You never know when you need them. So there will be a fan here instead of the hard drive tray, so we'll install that soon. But now let's go ahead and go back to what we were doing, and that's running the rest of our power cables. So we're going to move this to the side like so. And we're going to start figuring out how we're going to run all this. Now, what I like to do right off the bat is go ahead and start cleaning up some of this, because we got these wires just kind of dangling right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin them up here and get a zip tie and just go ahead and zip it. So they provided us, they were kind enough to provide us with zip ties. So why not go ahead and use them? And opening this with gloves is going to suck. All right, so again, we're in the business here to be neat. So you've got these little tabs here that are actually provided so that you can tie up your wires and make things neat. So you better use them, right? Why would you not? So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that. And then let's see, should we got another zip tie? Probably not, that'll be fine. And then we're gonna run probably a tie right there for our audio cable, just because I could just leave it, because you can leave these kind of dangling. So I don't know if you've ever seen that Homer Simpson meme where he looks good in the front but then all the fat's tied up in the back. That's basically every PC build ever. So you can see we've done that, laying there. I'm gonna go get my snips and we'll snip these right now. If you don't have snips, you can just use scissors. Don't slice your cable on accident. So there we go. So I like cleaning that up while I'm moving, right? So now I'm gonna go ahead and take this big boy cable. This is our main power to the motherboard. And we're gonna flip over here and we can see it's on the top. So I'm just gonna push this through and then let's turn it back. And we're gonna take this, I'm gonna take a lot of slack out of it because what we're gonna do is you've got one locking tab. Now, if we look at the motherboard itself, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a lip right here. There's no lip on that side. The lip needs to be there to grab the locking tab. So that's how you know the orientation you need to go. So you're gonna push this until it clicks or until you have engagement, and then usually yank back on it gently. If it doesn't lock in, you'll know because you'll be able to pull it right out. So there we go. And then what we'll do is we'll just kind of pull this back for cable management's sake, but be careful not to yank it too much because you can flex it and potentially rip it off the board. I've never seen that happen, but you know, you can muscle man anything. So next order of business is going to be our CPU. So these are labeled, thankfully, because they look just like PCIe, which goes to our GPU. Here's one of our CPUs, and remember we split one of these cables right here. So here are our two CPU cables. And we're gonna route them to the top here because they're gonna plug in right there. So let's go ahead and you can pick your poison. You can either do the small one first or the big one. It doesn't matter. In this case, again, like I said, I've only ever seen 8 pins. Not a small pin like this one, but hey, first time for everything, I guess. There we go, that clicked in. And now we're gonna take the big boy, the big brother, and we're just gonna feed it through. And now the annoying part is I swear they're always oriented the way you don't need them. We're gonna turn it over and then I'm gonna shut up so you can possibly hear it click. There we go. Give them a little tug, make sure they don't fall out. And then there we go, so those are plugged in. So we got our CPU taken care of. We're just gonna push this connector. I'll show you a trick. You can just push these connectors like when you're doing cable management. You can just push them to the side or corner like this. Provided this one doesn't want to turn the way I want it to turn. But usually you just push them into a corner and forget about them like that. And that's easy cable management, right? And then this guy, usually I'll either zip tie or I'll leave it be because sometimes I need it to flex a certain way to be able to close this back cover because these cables are pretty thick. So don't always zip tie these right away because sometimes when you're putting the back cover, if they're laying one on top of each other like this, you might have to move them a little bit down there. So they lay like this. That way the front or the back panel here actually clips into like it's supposed to. The rest of these are for the GPU. And because we know where our GPU is going to be, hint, hint, it's always the metal reinforced PCI slot right there. We know the power, so the PCU is going to come out, or the GPU is going to come out somewhere over here. So I'm going to go ahead and funnel them through this little rubber hole here. Just because I know exactly where it's about to come out, right? So we're going to go ahead and push both of these through. This one too, because we're going to use pretty much all of these for our GPU, because it's a big boy GPU and it needs all the power. So if you're running an NVIDIA GPU like my 4090, you might want to look into how to seat that connector and be very careful that you do that the right way, because there is a wrong way to do that. So you want to be careful with that. Okay, now with all the wires put through, we can start looking into doing our cooler and the fans for the case, and then eventually our GPU. I'm actually gonna shift over to fans because I want to kind of run the wires for the fans before I put in the CPU cooler and the GPU. Because once that big old GPU gets in here, it's gonna take up a lot of space and it's a little harder to do some wire cleanup with that thing in the way. So I'm actually gonna do fans, and what I have here is the Arctic fans. You can get these on Amazon for about 30-40 bucks. Comes in packs of 5s. You can get the 140 millimeter variants or the 120 millimeter fans. So what's the difference? Obviously the 140s are massive. They're a lot bigger. They tend to run quieter and push better. I think they're better with low pressure. I'm not going to get too much into the aerodynamics, but I prefer 140s if I can use them. Not all cases can take 140s. I believe this case can run two 140s or three 120s, two 140s or three 120s here, a 120 in the bottom and a 120 on the back. Again, I don't really like the Fractal stock fans, so I like to run the Arctic ones. They push a lot more air better. I've noticed that my case temps or my overall motherboard temp and everything in there on all my previous builds have been so much cooler with Arctic fans, so I prefer to run them. Now, because I only have 5 of these, and I could technically run 3 and 3 and 1 and 1 of the 120s, I obviously don't have enough. I'm gonna do a combination of using my 140s and my 120s. I'm thinking I'll probably run more 120s on my intake and my exhaust. So I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then use two 140s on the top, which should be more than enough. So this is gonna be a positive pressure system, and all that means is we're gonna be sucking more air in than we're gonna be blowing out. And it's not that big of a difference, but essentially what that means is it's gonna push more air out of anywhere crevices in the cracks. There are variances between running a negative air system and a positive air system. I prefer a positive pressure system. That being said, the rule of thumb is always cold air is on the bottom, hot air rises to the top, right? So you always want to orient your fans as intake in the front or down, and always the top part of the case should be your exhaust fans. So these are going to be sucking in clean air from the bottom and the front. This one's always, almost always, an exhaust fan pulling hot air out, and the tops should be pulling hot air out as well. So you're using the natural physics behind convection of cold air and hot air as they split. They have different densities, and you're going to aid them with the fans. So I'm going to go ahead and start installing the fans. Usually Arctic sends you screws. Again, these are the same screws that we pulled out of the what do you call them? The Fractal fans. They're just coarse thread like this. They're going to basically bite into the parts of the plastic of the fan. It's going to basically cut its own thread. So these are self-tapping screws. And we're just going to screw them in. So you have these slots here, which is nice. You basically put them in, and I'll show you how to do one, and then I'm going to do all the other ones off camera, so you don't need to watch me install a billion fans. But essentially, these slots will allow you to move the fan, and then you tighten it down wherever you need it. And that's all you got to do. So let's go ahead and install one of the 140 fans on the top. Now, how do you know orientation? So almost every fan provider will put arrows to show you exactly where the flow is. So for Arctic, usually the logo facing is going to be where it's pulling in. So if you wanted this to be an exhaust fan on the back, the Arctic logo looks inside the case. If it was an intake, the Arctic logo looks outside the case. Again, if you forget that, and it might be different for different fans, there's always arrows pointing where you need them to be. So we want these to be exhaust fans, right? So that means Arctic logo looking towards motherboard, or in other case, facing the arrow pointing that way. So it's going to go in like this because it's going to be pushing air up. So we're going to put two 140 mils. Let me put the screws there on the top like so. And oh wow, look at that. We got a broken fin. Which one of these has a broken fin? What in the world? Well, that sucks. Oh yeah, look at that. This one is smashed up. Well, that's fun. Okay, well, looks like we got a return in order. We got two broken fin fans. Look at that. Incredible. Okay, well, good thing I only need to use two of them. I'm definitely going to get a return started because that's just not cool. So let me set that aside. I'm going to take pictures and send that off to Amazon and probably get a return or a refund set up because that honestly sucks. I'd rather have a refund. That way I don't really need to use these anyway. So I don't have to get these fans for free. So I'm going to take some pictures, send it off to Amazon right now. But yeah, this is why if you buy PC parts, don't let them sit and collect dust while you're waiting for other parts. Always, always, always check them when you get them, because more than likely, you know, things like this happens where you go outside the warranty period, you check it, and then it's broken, and it's too late to return them. So always check your parts as soon as you get them. I always have a habit, especially with car parts and everything. I open the box, I check my parts, I make sure everything's solid, and then if it's solid, then I put it in collects dust like the Datsun Weber carburetors, which have been in my attic for about 2 years now. So we're not going to talk about that though. So I'm going to go ahead and before I forget, I'm going to go send this off to Amazon, and then I'm going to show you how to install one of these fans, and then I'm going to install the rest and do all the wire management, and I'll show you how the fan headers work. So this is kind of lame. My MSI board, I mean, I'm not trying to start a war of Gigabyte MSI. This thing only has one system fan, two system fan, three system fan headers. That's it. I mean, the MSI I had, like, I have the, oh my God, the Carbon. I've got like 7 or 8 fan headers. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, fan headers are, as you see right here, That's just what the motherboard, that's how it powers your fans, right? So what you can do is you can daisy chain these. So the 120s actually come with a male-female plug like this. So effectively I can put this into one header and then I can chain all of them off of this one. So it'll power all the fans. But what happens is when we do our fan curves and we control the speeds of the fans individually, it means if I put all of those in CPU, or not CPU, excuse me, in system fan header 3, so when I open the BIOS or whatever software I want to use for fan control, I'll see system fan 3, and then I can adjust the speed and put the fan curve. So what a fan curve effectively is just a curve where if you cross a certain temperature point, that's how much of a percentage of power you're going to send to your fans. Well, what happens if I daisy chain the front 3, right, is when I do, let's say on system fan header 3 on the board, when I see that on the interface, when I crank that to 100%, all of these fans will go to 100%. So I don't have individual control. And honestly, I'm fine with that. Usually there's no reason why I would run split speeds on the front fans. I usually have them at the same speed all together. So the only, this one obviously I like to control at a different speed if needed. And sometimes the tops, I actually would prefer to have them together. So if you don't have splitters, you can buy fan splitters. Or if you have a fancier case, like the Fractal 7, the XL, or I believe the 7s in general, they have a actual like fan controller where you can plug all your fans into there and then you can control it from there. So what is a fan header? If we look inside our board, you'll see SYS fan up there, CPU fan. Now CPU fan is obviously for your CPU or cooler, not for your system fans. You could plug a system fan in there, but that's reserved for your CPU and you kind of need that, right? So if you look across your board, you'll find there's another one right there, system fan 2, and then obscured at the bottom down there, system fan 3. So you'll have plugs like this, and they've got these little slots, so you can't really flip them. They only go one way. You're basically going to work your fan control or fan wires to any of those headers. Now is a good time if you're going to do individual control. So if you want to control all your fans individually and your board has a bunch of system fan headers, write down which one is where. So let's say this is system fan 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then maybe 7. That way, when you go into your fan curve and you control it, you know what fan you're controlling. If you didn't do that, it's not a big deal. You go in your software, and an easy way to tell what header is controlling which fan is put it to 0 or put it to 100%. Usually I just put it to 0%, and then you see which fan stops, and then you know what fan header controls which fan. So think of it as an ID or a driver's license saying, hey, I'm the ID for this fan. System fan 2 is middle front fan or such. So in our case, all of these fans are going to be daisy chained in the front if hopefully the wires can reach. I'm going to put them all on one header, and then I'm going to daisy chain the rest of them as needed just to make use of all the fan headers. But I'm kind of surprised this board doesn't have any more fan headers. That's kind of sucky. I mean, most new boards have so many fan headers. It's like, what in the world? Anyway, that being said, I'm going to run this front fan wire all the way to system fan 2 because I'm going to reserve system fan 1 for this one right here. Which reminds me, I'm not going to have one for this back one then. Son of a gun. All right, well, I guess I'm going to have to daisy chain these two together off of system fan 2. So I'm going to have to go to my parts bin and go get a daisy chain cable so I can do that. But let me go ahead and just show you how to install one of the fans. That way you know how to do it, and then you can do it. It's the same for all the parts in the case. So again, make sure you have your orientation correct. You're going to get one of your coarse screws. You can use these as many times as you want. Where's my Phillips? We're going to go ahead and prep that. And just make sure you have your orientation. Again, for us, we want Arctic logo to face in. So we're going to go ahead and slot this up here. And you'll notice it lines up in these grooves. And we're just going to go ahead and thread this in. And it's going to go pretty tough, because you're basically cutting a thread into that plastic. That's normal. Go ahead and thread one of them all the way so your fan doesn't dangle. And I wouldn't leave it on one. It's not going to snap, honestly. I've never had that happen before, but put at least 2 while you're dilly-dallying and doing other things. So that way it supports it. And then leave these loose until you know where you want them. So if you leave them loose, again, I'm going to put the other, you want all 4, right? I'm just putting 2 for now. So you can move your fan as needed. Sometimes the cooler gets in the way of the fan, or you've got something getting in the way, so you got to shift it around as needed. So just make sure you keep them loose until you get them in final position, and then torque them down. Again, you're torquing in screws into plastic. You don't have to go crazy here. Just torque it until it's pretty snug, and then a little bit more. That's all you need to do. As long as the fan isn't shifting around or falling around, you're good to go. You don't have to go any more than that. So that's how you install a fan. As for plugging into the headers, I mean, I don't think I need to show this. It literally just goes in. All right, real quick, if you want to daisy chain your fans and they didn't come with the ability to do so, you can buy this cord off of eBay, Amazon. Here's what this one's called, J Beck Tech All Black Sleeve to 2 Converter 2-pack. Just look up daisy chain for computer fans, and this is all you need. What this will do is you plug one of these into your motherboard, and then you daisy chain this off to all your fans, and then that system fan header will control everything that those fans are connected to. So I'm going to do that for these top 2. So I only need to use one of these ports. That way I can control both at the same time. No biggie, I don't need individual control. Okay, we're getting pretty close to being finished here. I've got the 120 in the back. I've got 2 140s on the top, 3 120s on the front, and 1 120 on the bottom just because I can. These, again, are sucking fans, so the Arctic logo is facing out. So we'll have 3 pullers, 1 puller from the bottom. I kind of like this setup here because what will happen is this will pull. As the air is coming together, it's going to kind of shove it into each other. And the GPU is right here with the 3 fans, so it's kind of just going to blow directly into the GPU. The top 2 120s are pushing fans, so they're pulling out of the case and pushing out. Same thing for this back fan. So again, all cold air from the bottom in here, and we're exiting, making this kind of angle. That being said, let's go ahead and get our cooler on. So here comes the fun part with paste, and I'm just going to trigger a huge debate in the comments, I bet. So we're going to get our thermal paste on our CPU. And then we're gonna go ahead and mount our big old Assassin 120 CPU cooler. And once we get that cooler in, we can put the GPU in, plug it up, and then do a little more wire cleanup, and we'll be done. All right, if you go ahead and get the Thermalright Assassin, Peerless Assassin cooler, as you can see, I've got the double stack, the heavy duty one. They also make a single one. These coolers are awesome, but you might get a little overwhelmed, so you'll get 2 fans. If you get the double, you'll get a single. If you get the single stack, they give you a lot of hardware. So this hardware is so that you can mount various CPUs. They also give you thermal paste, though I prefer to just use Arctic for performance. They also give you fan jumpers, and they give you these spring clips right here, which are very important because this is what holds your fans in. Now, depending on what CPU you have, it's going to be labeled so that you have series CPUs. So you have the 115X and 1200 CPUs. Honestly, this is an older CPU socket. Not many people are running this at this time. 1700 is current Intel, I believe, and then we're running AMD, so we're running AM4, AM5 hardware. This is an AM5 CPU. As you can see, even here it says AM5. So we want this hardware, and we want AM5 mounting brackets. So if you have an Intel, you actually have to change the backing plate. So that involves these little stand screws here. You're gonna have to screw it from the back and push it out, and then replace it with this in the hardware. But these guys have detailed instructions on their website. There's a lot of different installation instructions, even in the manual, showing you how to do this. We're not going to show the Intel right now. I believe even on Gamers Nexus, they've installed this and show how to do it. So go ahead and check them out and give them a follow. We're going to do AM4, which is really easy. So the AMD installation is a little less complicated than Intel. So we're going to get our AM4 brackets out. Even though we have an AM5, it's the same thing. They just don't bother to stamp AM5 on it. And we're going to need our AM5 step-off stands and hardware. So we're just going to open this up, get our little plastic stands and our screws. And I'm going to drop that because I'm a klutz. And then we're going to toss this onto my poor Mercedes, which is now currently being used as a table. And before anybody screams for me at the paint, I need to repaint this thing anyway. If you've been following this project, you already know. Besides, cardboard won't damage the paint. As long as you're not dragging it across and you just set it down, it'll be fine. But that paint is far more damaged than that little bit of cardboard is ever going to do. So I'm going to set this down. And the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and install our stands. So we're going to go ahead and get our spacers. And these are really nice because you just put them in like so. And remember, depending on the cooler you use, whether it's water cooled, air cooled, all of them have unique instructions that you need to follow. So follow the instructions that are provided to you. It's all unique. So obviously this can't go like that. It's going to go like this, right? There's only one way you can go. Because I can't remember if I need to orient them this way or this way. I think you orient them both side in towards the CPU. I'm going to go check the manual because there's no shame in that. Go in all of its glory. As you can see, the bode side goes into the CPU. So again, very detailed instructions that they provide for all the different sockets. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do bode side towards CPU. I'm going to go ahead and put one screw in like so by hand, just so I can kind of guide it in. And I'm going to rest the other one like so, get my screw, drop it in, just run it by hand for now. We're gonna do the same thing. This time, I'm gonna get fancy. We'll do 2 screws at once. So, look at that, Mr. Fancy Pants. And we're gonna go ahead and just snug this down. And don't tighten one side all the way. Tighten a little bit on one side, then go to the other side. And this will be more important when you're tightening the cooler, but it's also very important in general to tighten things evenly. So I'm gonna go ahead and snug this. And again, you don't have to go crazy tight here, just feel resistance and a little bit more. And then we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and snug that. You really don't want to strip these, and snug that. There we go. A piece of dirt on the CPU. But we're good now. Okay, so make sure your CPU is clean before you get to the thermal paste. Now, thermal paste. This is where a lot of people get divided. Do you do the P shape? Do you do the X shape? Do you do whatever the shapes are anymore? I don't even remember all the shapes. So what does P shape mean? That means you put a pea-sized drop in the center, and when you squeeze the cooler down, it separates it all the way around. I used to do that method all the time. It's fine. You could also, they usually provide you with a spreader in one of these. It's probably jammed up in there. It's like a plastic little spatula. Technically, that's the most correct method. If you want to make sure you get full coverage, you just spread it out. And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? And then when you put your cooler down, you're guaranteed to have coverage. I prefer the X method, so I do an X, and then I actually do 4 dots, which a lot of people say excessive, including myself. But there's been plenty of testing showing that even if you have excessive thermal paste, like literally if I were to empty this entire bottle on here, it doesn't really change the thermals. So thermal paste is really there to fill the gaps, right? So if we look at our cooler, let's go and undress our beautiful cooler here. And be careful when you pull on this, these fins can slice you open. If you look on our cooler here, we've got a flat surface. Now, the more flat and more perfect the surface, the better. In a perfect world, you don't need any thermal paste, and you would just plop this directly in the CPU, and you would have the best cooling ever. However, because things aren't machined 100%, and there's all types of things, you use thermal paste essentially to facilitate filling any of the little gaps where these aren't touching 100%, and that facilitates that thermal transfer. Now, one thing that everybody forgets with their coolers is peel this label off. Do not forget to peel off the plastic off your cooler. There's a lot of people who have run plastic on their coolers, and they get these advanced coolers and they're like, man, this thing sucks. It doesn't cool at all. And turns out they didn't peel off the plastic. So don't be that guy or girl or whatever. So thermal paste now, like I said, I like to do an X. I just start from one corner and I keep a fairly even flow. And then I do the same thing from the other side. And again, this is definitely more thermal paste than you need, but I like to err on the side of having more than less. And I've done this method many times before, and I've never had issues. So, there we go. I'm gonna shoot, people have done smiley faces, they've done everything. There we go. Now we got our thermal paste on our CPU, and we're ready to go ahead and mount our cooler. So we can put either that way or this way. And you can see these little spring nuts are where we're gonna line up on our mount here. So the only thing I can recommend is when you're doing this, is you don't really wanna smear your CPU. Now, the screwdriver ain't gonna work, so I need to go find another screwdriver so that I can get deep down in there and tighten that down. It's an abomination. So I'm just gonna start tightening one side and then immediately go to the next side. And this is very important when you're installing any cooler, is you really wanna tighten both sides evenly. So just make sure you're tightening them evenly, and I like to go all the way until it bottoms out. There we go. That's all it takes. So you don't have to go crazy tight, but just once it bottoms out a little more, just like everything we've been doing. And there you go. That's it. Your cooler is now mounted. So now what we need to do is go ahead and install our fans. So Thermal, right, actually does a pretty neat thing with these things and how they mount them. They use these little spring clips. So I'll show you how to do that here in a second. So here are our fans. But before I do that, I want to see how I'm going to mount them because my CPU fan header for power is right there. So that's going to be fun to get in there. So I'm going to try to plug that in first. I need to find the splitter that they provided me because we need to run one power source to both fans. There's absolutely no need why you would need to control the fan speed. Here it is. Of one differently, the other, they should be blowing at the same rate. So I got to get that in there, and then we're going to do a little bit of fidangling with the wires so we do a nice clean install. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and then I'll catch you up and show you how the fans clip onto this cooler. All right, so I got the fans mostly mounted in there. So you can see that's where the CPU fan header is, and it splits, right? So there's one right there, and that goes to this fan, and then the other splitter comes to here. So here's my advice if you're doing this. These usually come tied up with these little metal ties. Go ahead and zip tie it first, then cut the metal tie or unravel it, and keep it tight like that. You don't need it to run that far unless your motherboard CPU header is far away, but usually the CPU fan header is always near the CPU because, you know, that makes sense. So yeah, for wire management purposes, keep them taut. I know it's a little hard to kind of make it happen, but you can like run it underneath right there, the wires, and you'll never see them. So if you're a person like me that likes wire management, this is what you got to do. And I know you're probably thinking, why did you get black? Well, this one was cheaper, so I just wanted the gray one. I don't really care. I think it kind of breaks up the flow a little nicely. So whatever. Now let me show you. Now let me show you how to do these clips. So come on, bro. This is like when your headphones get tied up in your pocket. Okay, this is pretty cool. I actually like how Thermal Take goes about this. So you put them in like so. Come on, buddy. There we go. There's one. There's two. And then I gotta do the same thing on the other side. Which I should probably pull the fan out to do that, huh? That would make sense. I gotta flip our clip here. There's one. And there's two. Now we're gonna make our way downtown. And just gently so we don't bend any fins. I know it sounds like we're bending all the fins, but we're not. We're good. And then you're just gonna pull these little spring tabs like that. I kid you not, that's it. Check that out. Isn't that smart? Boom, done. Look at that, bam, boom, bam. Bada bing, boom, bang. Remember, Thermal Take needs to face out. This is a push, this is a pull fan that pushes through, and that one just pushes through, so they have to go this way. It won't make a whole lot of sense if you have them facing any other direction. So make sure you point your fans in the right direction. It's also a common mistake I see with fresh builders is you get excited, man, you know? I think after you do a bunch of these, you stop getting excited and you spend so many hours on it that you just want it to be over with. I still enjoy it though. I wouldn't say that the spark has gone out. Now this front fan, sometimes you gotta run it a little higher than you want to clear your memory. Though I think we're gonna run it at this height because this is a good height in my opinion, where it touches or reaches the cooler really well. I'm just gonna make sure that I pull my wires. I know you guys probably can't even see this, but my wires have got caught in between the fan there, so I don't want that to happen. I also don't want them to be smacking that other fan. Not doing cable management. There we go. Look at that. Boom. Ain't touching nothing. All right, we got our CPU cooler mounted, nice and pretty. Look how big that thing is. That thing is big. She's big, she's thick. All right, now we're ready for our GPU. So make sure our locking tab is down. We're gonna go ahead and pull this first one, I think. I don't know where it's gonna line up, so I usually end up pulling most of these. I pull, let's see, I pulled two out. I'll show you why I pull two out. Okay, let me go all the way then. We're gonna have to install the anti-sag bracket for the GPU. And I will say this for NVIDIA guys, my 4090 didn't come with the anti-sag bracket. I know a lot of people say you probably don't need it. You do need it. That thing is heavy as heck. And if you think about it, your PC is always vertical and that gravity is always fighting it. And eventually you'll get what's called GPU sag, where the entire thing literally physically sags. That is no bueno. You do not want that. They're expensive. Take care of them. Get an anti-sag bracket for the NVIDIAs. You can buy like a little bar. I've seen people use bullets. I've seen people use all types of little toys that kind of, you know, pretend hold it up. Just anything to keep it up. Apparently the AMD one is supplied with an anti-sag bracket. I've never installed one. I'm excited to do that. So we're going to install that, and that will prevent that GPU sag. So let's go ahead and install our GPU. Now, this is a locking tab that works just the same way as the RAM sticks. However, GPUs have gotten so insanely large that you literally can't lock it in place anymore. So that's kind of pointless now. So what we're going to do is, down here you'll notice you've got a small one and a larger one. It corresponds to your PCIe slot. Make sure this is unlocked. Make sure you've taken these out, and you can see there's a little gap between the motherboard. That's where you're going to want this metal to go into. And just making sure that wasn't bent or anything. And we're going to try to shove this big old brute in there. And it looks like it's just big enough. So this is going to be fun. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the power cords are going to get in the way there. Oh my god, this thing is huge. Okay, so the power cords that need a... Oh, that could have been bad. The power cords that need to plug or run our power to our GPU, we're gonna have to yank them out for now, and we're gonna have to reposition them because there's no way they're gonna go in through there because the GPU smacks into them. So we're just gonna put them off to the side for now, and we'll leave that one there. I think that should be fine. Let's take our GPU again. And I'm going to grab it right here. We're going to install the anti-sag bracket in a second. Now this is the fun part because these things are so massive that it's so hard to see where the darn board even plugs into anymore. There we go. So you should hear it click like it did, and now you can see why you need an anti-sag bracket, because there's no way when I lift this up all that weight is going to come down. Of course you need to put your screws in right there. We'll put in one block off plate there. Is this fan touching? No, it's not. Oh my god, this is just stupid. But we're gonna go ahead and put our anti-sag bracket in now. So that looks like it's gonna sit like this, and it's just a little rubber pad. So we're gonna have to take those two screws out, and then we'll put them back in as soon as we put the anti-sag bracket. But before we do that, this top screw up here, we can go ahead and put in so we have at least something supporting our GPU. So we're going to go ahead and return the screw in here. For reference, it's 4 in the morning and I haven't slept, so give me some slack here if you're noticing me making some silly mistakes. Probably should have called it a night to prevent me from making dumb mistakes, but we're trekking through. We're trekking through. So we're going to put these 3 screws in. The 3 proper screws, should I say. And then we're going to make sure that the rubber pad is adjusted on the card, which it is. So we're just going to go ahead and snug these up. This is a really nice anti-sag bracket, I gotta say. Big points to AMD for that. Honestly, I think NVIDIA really needs to start adding anti-sag brackets. I mean, when you build cards that are just so ridiculously large nowadays, like, you need to provide an anti-sag bracket. It's kind of ridiculous that I have to go out of my way to go purchase one. So, yeah. Anyway, you can go ahead and put this block off plate back in. So just put that back, and then we'll use one of our existing screws from earlier, and we'll just go ahead and snug that up. So let's check and make sure it's nice and tight, because our anti-sag bracket needs to be preventing snag. After all, that's the whole point. And we're going to lift this up, and if it's working correctly, you can see the card doesn't sag down. This is supporting its weight. Good stuff. Now we can run our power, which I would have preferred to run it from the bottom, but then you risk hitting the fans. which I'd rather not do. But on the other side, if you run from here, it looks kind of messy. So pick your poison. You want to run them from the top or the bottom? There's really no good answer here, honestly. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. I think I might just run them from the bottom. And then I hate how you can see the wires here. So I might need to figure out if I can put some sort of a cover. I really wish they gave you like a cover or something to just put here. I might cut that cover from earlier, but I guess you can't really see that. So let me make a decision on whether or not I'm running the bottom wires from top or bottom, and then I'll show you how to plug it into the GPU, and then you're pretty much done. All right, so I ended up running them through this gap on the bottom here, which again, I hate, but I don't know. I would have wished they put like, you could put like an adjustable cover or something here, or maybe in rubber, but you know, with vents, so the fan could still do its thing, but you know, it's whatever. At this point, we're just gonna leave it as is. So to plug in these guys, we got excess wire right now, which is fine. We're gonna go ahead and you've got 1 6-pin and a 2-pin. They go together. Don't ask me why it's made like this. I didn't design this. But the square bit goes on the end, and you'll see you kind of can't mess this up, even if you wanted to. And there we go. And then same thing here. Like I said, you can't mess it up like I just tried to. And with this, make sure you plug it in until it clicks. This needs to be seated well. There is no excuse for it not to be seated well. All right, now if you've got a 4090, you should probably know that you shouldn't daisy chain. And it's best to run power supply like a PCI. So you see how we're daisy chaining one cable's powering 2 ports? You definitely don't want to do that with the 4090. Because that thing sucks a lot of power. And you want to make sure you're giving it enough juice. Now there's debates online whether or not it's fine or you can get away with it. I, on my own build, actually just ran, because I have a 1500 watt, I ran individual lines, no daisy chaining. So that power hungry beast of a GPU should have more than enough juice without risking blowing anything up. All right, there we go. Now I just need to clean up this wires. So basically I'll just shove them back in there, zip tie it up a bit, and that's it. You've got a fully built PC. You've got your CPU, you got your power supply, you've got your storage, in this case an M2, you got your fans, you got everything plugged up, you got your CPU cooler, you've got your IOs connected. That's pretty much it. So I'm gonna clean up this wiring. I'm not gonna bore you any further with the video. I'll give you one little peek once I'm done with the whole thing and it's reassembled with the glass and everything. And then we'll go ahead and test it. I'm not gonna bother recording that point. If it posted and nothing blew up, I'll give you guys a thumbs up at the end of the video. If it didn't, I'll let you know. But hope that was informative. I know there's a couple of mistakes along the way. Forgive me, I'm tired. Pulling an all-nighter once again, so I really want to get this out of the way because I got plans this weekend, so I have to get this complete. If you enjoyed watching this video and it helped you, I'm glad it did. And pretty soon we're going to go back to the usual content of... Alright, so real quick guys, what you're seeing here is the final product, and keen eyes are going to notice right off the bat that that's an MSI GPU in there. That's actually an MSI 4080 Super. So after we finished that build, that same night I decided to go and install a fresh copy of Windows. It's pretty much the standard process you do. The system did actually post successfully. I went ahead in BIOS, just verified that the temps were okay on the CPU. I just do that to make sure that the CPU cooler is mounted. If you're seeing weird fluctuations in the BIOS for the CPU temps, then chances are your cooler wasn't mounted correctly. You might have the wrong pressure, or the thermal paste wasn't enough, or there could be a variety of things. So anyway, after that, went through to install Windows, and actually it crashed through the installation about 4 times, which is unusual. I mean, I've had issues with installation every now and then, so I ended up making a fresh copy, fresh USB to install Windows from. Still had issues and finally managed to get it through the installation process. And then from there I realized, we had some issues, so I actually got it to post into Windows. And then pretty much every time that I opened anything to do with the graphics,
I was noticing that it would crash. So anytime I try to load any of the AMD software to update it, and the whole control manager and everything, every single time, whether it was Windows or AMD, the minute it got onto the GPU for updating the drivers, the system would just crash immediately. So something funky was going on, and I was thinking to myself, it could either be bad memory, it could be a bad power supply. I'm really doubtful that the CPU would have been an issue at that point, so I went ahead and ran memtest, which basically just tests the memory for bad sectors. And I ran that for quite some time, and it actually passed with flying colors. There were no issues with the memory, so I was like, okay, it's not the memory. The next thing I was thinking, maybe daisy chaining the CPU was probably an issue. Tried not daisy chaining, and actually got another cord, because that power supply doesn't come with an extra cord, though it does have a slot for it, so you don't need a daisy chain like I did in the video. In general, I know I daisy chained, but I would just recommend not daisy chaining the cables and just running individual power cords, but I would follow the instructions based off of your GPU. So that didn't fix it either, and then I decided, you know what, I'm just going to take the GPU out entirely and then try to reinstall Windows. I actually even tested the SSD, the NVMe. That was fine too. That passed. There were no issues or errors within that itself. And then after I removed the GPU and ran through integrated graphics, which is just going through the CPU, so the GPU was completely out of the equation, I was able to install Windows without a problem. Everything was smooth, so in the end I ended up ruling out that it was the GPU, because anytime I did anything with the GPU driver-wise or launched anything or whatever it was, it would be a complete system crash. So yeah, what you're seeing here is pretty much the 4080 Super that I ended up getting from Micro Center, and pretty much this card does everything that the AMD card would do, if not better. And ever since we've had it, it's just been great. So yeah, that ended up being the issue with the system. Other than that, everything else has run great so far, and you can see it's even loaded up on the truck here, ready to go. I didn't actually drive with it in the bed of the truck. That would end very badly, but everything went really well. I delivered to my brother, and he's using it to this day. So that's the only update I wanted to provide. Ended up being a faulty GPU. Things happen. Thankfully, I was able to return that. And yeah, so I hope you really enjoyed the video. I know it was really long. This wasn't really a like how-to quick thing. It was really just more like if you want to listen to somebody ramble and build a PC in real time, then there you go. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. This channel will kind of be evolving over time, and we'll try to explore different things, not just automotive, though the main focus will be automotive. So if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.